it probably could have been helped a long time ago, and now it's a lot more difficult to help, right, and to address it because we didn't do X, Y, and Z previously, and now we're in this crisis state. And so now we have, it's the thing, I think, whenever I think about a 50-year timeline from, so what year is this? 2022, right? Yeah. So 2072, right? Maybe I'll be alive, maybe I won't, who knows? But, you're like, okay, in 50 years, we can't be living and doing things the way we are right now.
Right.
Like, we just cannot. It cannot be the case. Like, environmentally, sustainability-wise, in terms of, like, care for people. It's just, so we have to change things. And the question is, how can we do that and start those steps in radical ways where people still feel safe? Because the people right now that have positions of power feel the reason why they react against change is because they feel unsafe.
Hey everybody, this is Tony.
And this is Paul. We're coming at you from the Friends for Life podcast.
Hey, I'm Tony Stewart. I like to read books on leadership. What? Thanks. Hey everybody, I'm Paul with Friends for Life. Yeah. I have no idea what I'm doing.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Friends for Life podcast. This is the Sarah takeover while Tony and Paul are out on the road interviewing people in all 88 counties. We're so happy you joined us today, and let's go meet our guests. Hi, Allie.
Hi, Sarah.
How are you?
I'm well.
Good. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Allie Day, and I am an associate professor of disability studies, which is how I know Sarah. We were also neighbors, which happened at the same time that I moved here to take this job. Found out she was a graduate student in my program, and then also lived around the corner from me and had a beautiful baby. So we became friends in the way that millennials do. And yeah, besides teaching and researching, I'm a new parent, which is really fun, and a very angry Ohio citizen who's mad at every piece of legislation in the House right now. So that's a little bit about me.
That sounds good. The main thing I remember about when you first moved in, and maybe it was like a forewarning of how Ohio is going to be, but like the weekend you moved in, or the week, was when we couldn't bathe or drink our water, the Toledo water, for 3 to 5 days. Like, it was a significant amount of time. There was that huge algae bloom.
Yeah, no, I remember because my wife and I moved from Chicago with our 2 little dogs and our cat. And we had come here once before to look at places, found the place to rent. We arrived in the middle of 1 o'clock in the morning or something, unloaded the dogs, put water out for them, crashed on an air mattress, right? Woke up the next morning, our landlord, who we met one time to sign papers, knocks on the door. He's got a pallet of water bottles, and he says, "Don't drink the water. Don't let your dogs drink the water." Our dogs are old, right? And we're like, "What do you mean don't let her?" We put the water out last night. And he was like, "They're gonna die if they drink the water." We're like, "What is happening?" We had no radio, we had no access to the outside world. So, I called my new colleagues, and they helped explain what was happening, which was major algal bloom. And then about 4 or 5 days later, we had friends coming who were driving through they were driving through from the East Coast to the West Coast, and they were going to stay with us. They were good friends of ours. And they were like, "Should we bring water? What do you guys need?" We were like, "Yeah, bring some water." Because we could, at that point, we could turn it on and we could bathe. But it was I don't know how long that's going to last. So yeah, just bring some water, please. And I remember you were so generous that you were, your family had a well, right?
Yes.
And so you were bringing some of my colleagues out to fill water at the well. Yeah. At your parents or your family's house. Yeah,
they lived in a different town where it was safe, and then we did have friends who lived a little closer who had a well.
Yeah. But then I was where? Our friends were where did you? They were I remember they were so you guys just moved, right? Is that the Toledo that you moved to? The one that's on the news right now? And we were like, "Yep, that's the one. That's Toledo where we are. Proud. That's it. Here we are. Woo. Here we are in Toledo." But I actually really, really like Toledo quite a lot. I actually think it's full of really interesting and creative people, and it doesn't have a big ego, which I appreciate. Its ego doesn't get in the way of doing good things, unlike some of our other Ohio City neighbors. But I really like Toledo. I feel like
we need a new slogan. Like, you know, we have the "You'll do better in Toledo." Like, maybe we need like not too big an ego, but still cool.
Yeah. Like,
Humble yet cool.
Doing all right. Still got to clean up the lake, though.
Yeah.
You know? Like,
Yes.
lake's still sick.
We're not terrible, but we got some work to do.
A little bit more. Come join us. Yeah.
Join us in our effort. Yeah, no, I think that's like the biggest thing I always remember about meeting you was seeing you guys like, hey, we know you, and hey, do you need water?
Yeah, because we were walking the old dogs around the corner, and I actually saw your car with the Down syndrome bumper sticker. And I was like, oh, that's weird. There must be like a lot of those around. Like, they must be really like a lot of Down syndrome pride in this town. And I was like, oh no, that's the car I did see earlier. That's the Sarah that I met like earlier that morning or whatever. But yeah. Oh, happy Disability Pride Month, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you. I know there's so many great things going on right now. I like it. I love the Disability Pride. I think one of the I remember I was just talking about this on the last podcast that I recorded, is because something that I feel I learned really well doing disability studies, or that always challenged me. So like there's always like this status quo as to, well, this is the appropriate way to talk to a person with disability, like, you know, people first and this and that. And so we're always so afraid of disability, right? Like, or of the word disability. And so I felt like that was like one of the biggest takeaways that I learned is like, well, you know, disability doesn't have to be a bad thing, and that you can have pride in it, and you can, you know, you can embrace it. And so, yeah, I really love that, like, especially because I was involved in the disability studies program prior to having EV. And then after that went back for my master's. And it would just I just always felt so happy that I had like these perspectives that really challenged the way I'd always been taught about, you know, like pity or charity, you know, like as it being something like negative or that needed to be pitied or something like that. Cause I felt like it always like gave me like so much more, such a better perspective in like how we kind of went about things. So I was always really grateful for that. But
well, how much have you talked about your story in this podcast before? Have you talked about how you even found disability studies in the kind of serendipitous way that intersected with your pregnancy? And
yeah, I think I have. Like, I don't think I've done like a full podcast specifically like kind of on that, but I always bring it up. But yeah, I originally took a Dr. Nielsen's Disability 101. This was when she first moved. So she had just moved from Wisconsin to start at UT. And I had worked for agencies in residential settings in the DD field for so long that I literally was like, oh, I need an elective, and this is an easy A. I already know everything about disability. I know everything, which also, as Allie
it's
can
always
attest
such a charming
to,
student to have,
yes,
by the way.
yes,
we love that
absolutely.
in our students.
Well, and Allie can attest to, like, one of the things that that I remember fighting with you about, not fighting or having a discussion, was I'd be like, well, no, it's this way. And you'd be like, but why, Sarah? And I'm like, because it is, Allie. And you're like, no, you know what is really important about college and grad school is supporting your argument. And I'm like, but it just needs to be this way. And I don't want to support it. I
understand what you want to be true, Sarah.
Yes, exactly.
But let's look at the reality and then see how we get there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. And I still struggle with that to this day, but I also, I always have, I think, your voice and Kim's voice in my head saying, how do you support that, Sarah? And so I have to like take 27 steps backwards. But yes. So yeah, charming student as always. But I took hers, and then I believe I took a class. I want to say it was like poetry or the art, disability in the arts with Dr. Ferris. And so like I really quickly realized that I didn't know it all, and there was an entirely different view of like there was so much more than that than what I knew. And so luckily, like Toledo, my ego is just big enough. No. Luckily, I was able to be like, oh, crap, like I know nothing. This is amazing, and I want to learn it. So, so at that time, I was pregnant with Evangeline, and then I had her right after I finished up with my bachelor's. And it was very, very, very serendipitous for sure. And I'm always so grateful though, because it was really like then to have like these people in your life, like this community who was able to support that and to give you a different perspective and a different way of thinking and a different way of approaching things was phenomenal. So I ended up going back for my master's. At the time, you guys now have a graduate certificate.
We do.
At the time, you did not. So I just had to do a focus.
Yeah, you kind of did like an independent study master's degrees, a master in liberal studies, where you got to focus in these different places on disability.
Yes.
Well, and you did a project that was interesting that was really thinking through a disability studies lens and a feminist studies lens about fatness and fat phobia, which I think has only been a conversation that's grown in the last 10 years. So I think that was, I was not as familiar with the fat studies material by the time when you started. I knew some of it, right? And then it encouraged me to dive into it more, right? To really think through it. And now like probably 8 out of 10 of my podcasts are something about, fat studies and fat culture, because I think that's where some really interesting work is happening. But, right, so you had this like background in feminist studies that brought you into disability studies, which makes total sense because it's all about autonomy and thinking about how, well, we have this book at home, this kid's book, All Bodies Are Cool. Do you know that kid's book, right? So like in our house, whenever like something comes up about some sort of difference, we're like, all bodies are cool. Like if our kid is like talking about his scars, we're like, yeah, and all bodies are cool. Or if he's like, we're talking about skin tone, or like he notices something about somebody, on the street that's different. It's like all bodies are cool, right? Like,
I need to adopt that motto because my kids are definitely to the point. My 7-year-old, she wasn't even 7 at the time. My 6-year-old one day came home and she's like, Mom, why didn't you tell me I have fat thighs? And I was like, I'm like, who told you that? Like, we're going. And so I was
what little kid do I need to go?
Right. Yeah. Who do I need to have a conversation with? But so I'm just always amazed, like how soon that like starts, like all that crap starts. And so like, I grew up and my mom was always and she got it from her mom. It was like a very generational thing, very self-conscious about weight. So I remember growing up very early on, seeing her like complain about her body, see her like not feel fulfilled or whatever. And so I definitely feel like I internalized that probably the first 25 years of my life, right? And struggling with that mentality. And so that for me too, like this whole idea of like, wait, all bodies are cool. And so I'm going to have to adopt that for sure, because there's times like, because, the same with like the word disability, like, oh, don't say disabled. Like, it's like, don't say fat, and so they'll be like, oh, that person's fat. I'm like, there's nothing wrong with being fat.
Yeah.
Like, so, but I like that. It's a lot easier to encompass everything in that.
All Bodies Are Cool. I wish I could tell you the author of that kid's book right now, but All Bodies Are Cool is the title of the kid's book.
I will Google it.
I also really like, so Stella Young, who has since passed away, but she's a disability justice lawyer from Australia, and a disabled woman herself. And she does this TED Talk where she's talking about this term that she coins, inspiration porn, right? This idea that we only see disabled people in the media as like objects of our own inspiration. In order, we objectify them and their experience so that we can feel better about ourselves. Like, oh gosh, at least we're not that, right? And she's talking about this and she says, because you're up here thinking, I think like I've seen this so many times, you're up here thinking that I'm probably going to inspire you, right? And because she's like a small woman in a wheelchair. And she's like, but the thing is, we're all just using our bodies to the best of their ability. That's all, right? And she's like, I'm fond of my body, and this is like the body I was in, and it does what I need it to do, right? And I think that is the message that is so important to me as somebody that's doing justice work, right? At a systemic level, as somebody who's parenting, and as somebody who teaches, is like, it's all about understanding bodies as these vessels that carry a lot of significance, right? And we put a lot of meaning onto them. But they are all just vessels that we're using to do the work in the world that we're meant to do, right? Yeah. And so, which doesn't mean like they're like empty vessels, like they're full of meaning, right? But we inscribe that meaning onto them. So
no, I like that. Yeah, I find that especially like in parenting, and then you always think, because everyone's like, well, when I'm a parent, I'm not going to do that. Like we just like make these judgments like based on how our parents raised us. And, I'm not going to do that. And so I definitely struggle with that all the time. I see certain things that come up and I'm like, oh yeah, I know where that came from. Mm-hmm. But then how do I reframe it? Because, and I have very different belief systems than my parents did. So obviously what they did is not going to be what I do. But like, so how do we take the good stuff and kind of incorporate that and help give them a better sense of like justice and equity and all that stuff. Like my kids, I love kids. They're like, this is not fair. And I'm just like, life isn't always fair, but
life isn't fair, kids.
Yeah, suck it up.
Share it. Yeah.
But to be like, sometimes things aren't fair, and it does feel bad when things aren't fair. But here's what we can, So I struggle with that all the time.
So you don't just say suck it up.
No, I want to.
Yeah, in your head you do.
Yeah. Just suck it up and leave me alone.
Yeah. Mama needs 5 minutes. Yeah.
My favorite term is, mommy feels frustrated right now and needs a little space. Can you do that? And then they tell me, no. And I'm like, okay, well, at least I tried.
Yeah. So at least you asked for what you wanted.
I mean, I verbalized it. So, but yeah, so what kind of stuff? So you've been, so 8 years? You've been
2014 I started.
Yeah.
So what year is it? Yeah. So I finished 8 years. Yeah.
Finished 8 years. Mm-hmm. What kind of stuff are you working on right now? What's a major push? What's new at the DST apartment? I wish it was an apartment. That would be like the best reality TV show ever.
That would be a really great
DST apartment.
Put a bunch of disabled people in a loft and let's see how access works. Am I right? The best reality. 5 disabled people put together in a loft. How does the beginning of like the Real World start? It's like something like that. Yeah. Don't give them a job or anything to do. So all they can do is like sit around and bicker with each other.
Exactly.
Like that's like the whole premise.
Quality television.
God, I'm so glad that we're both millennials so we can relate to that particular thing, because nobody else like the kids these days. Like I asked the kids my students, my young adult students, at the beginning of the semester, like one of the things I ask, when we're all like just hanging out waiting for everybody to arrive, what have you been watching lately? What are you watching? And it used to be that like I could like connect with them, like, oh yeah, you binge watch this thing on Netflix, but now it's like they're watching things on YouTube that I'm like, I don't know who that is. Like, YouTube. So anyway, it's I need to up my cool factor and get back into what the kids are watching. But where was I going with that? Oh, the disability. What's new in the disability studies department, which is not an apartment, but could be fun if it was. So one of the things that we've been working on, so I'm the graduate director, because we have a graduate program now. We launched a disability studies graduate certificate, and we were going to do it in 2020, and then 2020 happened. Yeah, and so we just. I don't know if you know what happened in 2020. So it actually, in some ways, would have been an amazing time in the fall of 2020 to launch this certificate, because people were thinking about disability justice. They weren't necessarily calling it that, but when you're thinking about COVID and COVID protections and workplace protections and bodies that are more susceptible to long-term effects of COVID or to death, like these are all disability justice issues. And the program was all online. It was designed that way way before COVID. So it would have been great to launch it, but we didn't really have the spoons to promote it in the spring of 2020 because everything shut down and we were all just trying to, just do disaster control, basically. So we pushed the launch until last fall, so fall 2021. And we had our first graduate class, which was very fun and really interesting because some of the material, like, Sarah, you would have talked about and done, and we've done with other graduate students, but to have 4 or 5 talking about it together really makes a big difference than just like me and a student having a conversation, right? Because students push each other, right? And they bring a variety of interests to the table, right? And backgrounds, which pushes the conversation. So we started it. We had our newest professor actually do the first class, Professor Martellione. She's a feminist science studies person, and so she thinks about engineering and technology, and so she did our first class. And then the certificate program is just 4 classes, all asynchronous and online, which we designed that way so that people who process at different speeds can take the class and participate, people in different time zones. So we have people coming in internationally to take the courses. So, which can be tricky because we do offer, each class offers like a weekly or every other week optional synchronous session, like you log on at this time and we can talk about the material. And, I have one student right now this summer, I'm teaching the class, and, he's in California, which is 3 hours difference. And I do a 9 a.m. optional discussion on Fridays, but that's 6 a.m. for him. It's not terrible, right? So people get up at 6, right? But it is for the student an early morning, right? And so, but he has been a trooper because and I don't require it, but he, has wanted to come on and talk about different ideas. So that's a challenge, and that's always going to be a challenge, I think, with when you're doing virtual space classrooms. But yeah, so we have our first student completing the certificate this summer. She'll be done in a few weeks, and then she's going off to law school, Georgetown Law. So I'm really excited because she'll be taking the background in disability studies that she got at UT and bringing it with her into the law studies classroom, right? So, and then we have a number of other students who will be finishing in December. And I think we have, I can't even remember. I mean, we have a whole new cohort starting in September. So it's like one of these things where you could apply to the program at any time and you could start at any of the semesters, fall, spring, or summer. And then it just rotates through the classes. So you can finish in, if you take one class a semester and you do 4 semesters in a row, you would finish in like 15 months or something like that. But you don't have to do a class every semester. You can do one class, then maybe you have a busy season at work and you're going to take a break and then you do another class in the summer. So you can take your time with it as well. So it's been really fun. It's been super fun to launch that. And I have, I like to have all these ideas for the graduate students about how I'm, as the program grows, incorporating them into my undergraduate classes, right? So that they can be mentors, so that they can share their knowledge. Because I do think the best way to learn is to actually try to teach what you're learning, right? Because you think you know something, and then you try to get up in front of a bunch of people and talk about it, and you're like, I don't know anything. I don't know. I nothing. So I have and we're trying to build more of a disability justice community on campus too. And so we have awesome people in student disability services who are just amazing allies and get the disability justice thing. And in the ODI world, we have a new vice provost of ODI. So what that means, diversity and inclusion, what that means is he actually understands disability justice, and he's he actually used in a job interview the term ableist and talked about disability justice. I was like, oh my God, that's my guy. That's the one I want. That one right there. And everybody else was like, well, and I'm like, no, this one. Anyway, it wasn't that easy, but he's great. So I think UT is going to be a leader, or is a leader, in creating a campus community that thinks about disability justice as part of diversity. So our graduate certificate is just one piece of that puzzle, because there's student groups now that are doing it, and even student groups like SAGA, which is the sexuality and gender group on campus, always is thinking about disability, and some of our African American student union, all of these groups are thinking about disability as part of their own platforms, right? Yeah. So it's being integrated everywhere. So it's awesome.
I love that.
So that's just a little bit about what's going on campus.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like it's really shaped as well, the city of Toledo and how they have really taken an initiative to say they are partnering with the Ability Center and all that stuff to make Toledo the most disability friendly city that they can. I don't know if it was in the state of Ohio or in the nation or whatever.
Oh, I think it was in the world. They were why stop?
In the world.
Why stop at Ohio? Let's just
world domination.
World domination always, here in Toledo.
Yeah.
Again, ego. Small ego here in Toledo.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, but I think that shapes it. And I see a lot of, I'm always anytime, I run into so many people, and I know it's also the biggest small town type thing, that have had their start at the Disability Studies department. And anytime I'm like, yes, kindred spirits, come join me, let's go. And so I think like I know all these people who are doing these amazing things around equity and inclusion and disability justice, and it's just so cool to be like, hey, yeah, like I was a graduate student there.
I know, like we have
assistant.
You're a graduate assistant. Thank you for the flyers that you made for all our events, by the way. That was very helpful. Yes. We have a graduate who, much like you, she did the MLS program with a focus on disability before the graduate certificate launched, but she's at the Art Museum doing access, inclusion, justice work over there, which is amazing. She had worked there prior to coming into our program part-time. And then, she sort of interned at the Ability Center, did some advocacy work and policy work with them, and then was able to work her way, like, sort of into this passion job, and it happened, like, I think relatively quickly, actually, just over the course of a couple of years, that happened for her. And I think she was just so well suited and positioned to be the person on the ground, helping the Art Museum really think about the next 100 years of their work, right? And we have a great art museum. For those listeners not around Toledo, we have a great art museum here on the university, here at Toledo, with the Glass Museum. I mean, it really is. It is for a small city. It's a phenomenal museum, and it's free, which is even better. We have another graduate who is working with TARDA, right? He's like doing all the public transportation stuff, which you can't have an accessible city without good public transportation. Doesn't happen. Yep. And like many Midwestern cities, we have a lot of work to do. We are a car industry town. We were created for cars, right? We had to support the industry that was feeding us. So we created a very sprawling, sort of car-centric place.
And we continue to work on those roads continually.
Yes. I think we have more students dipping their feet into law school or into like places where they're doing policy. And then also folks that are in direct service, which is only a field that's going to grow as we have aging boomers, as we have long-term COVID survivors, as we have a number of other sort of chronic conditions that we can treat, but complicate people's lives. Like this kind of direct care is going to be really important, but we need people who can understand a system and their place in the system, and fight for things like unionizing, unionizing direct care workers, right? We have a shortage. I don't need to get on a soapbox. You know this already. But we have a shortage of direct care providers. Yes. And one of the reasons is because it's a huge burnout, right? We don't pay them well. We don't provide good benefits, if any benefits. Yep. And so it's not a sustainable way of life. And in the process of doing that work, if direct care providers weren't disabled in the beginning, they become disabled through that work. So that's like the great irony, right? Yeah. Is that it's a disabling position over time. My grandmother was a direct care provider for her whole life, right? And so it's providers, workers are a disability justice issue, right? And we need to be thinking about how to make it so that that people who do direct care have good lives and can make decisions and have autonomy over their lives and are living the best life that they can live, right? And that will make for better care. Yeah. Right? So, and part of that also is getting folks into places they want to live and not in and out of institutions and larger institutions, because that's also a place where direct care providers suffer as well, right? Like if they... So anyway, we have a lot of work to do, but how do we get on this?
I don't know.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Disability justice. But I think that's so true, because so a lot of our conversation, and so right now running a provider agency, for me that was definitely one of my things, right away. Why do we only start at $10 an hour? You're asking people to get all this specialized training, to pass medications, to give these things, and it's all this pressure. I remember when I was direct support, having nightmares about forgetting to give someone their medication. Yeah. Going home and dreaming of this, and then calling first thing in the morning, will you make sure that I sign that med administration sheet? Will you make sure that, this is I remember just having terrible, terrible dreams about failing a person while making $10 an hour. And so it's complete, it's that complete pressure and burnout and stuff like that. So there is, and I do love this, and this is what I really struggle with, is that there's all these different factions, for lack of a better word, right? So we have all these different DD entities. And I always take it back to kind of what Allyson Kafer talks about. And, like, we need to find that common ground where we can and work for it. So, like, I try and get to be very involved, like, provider world isn't always disability justice focused.
Yeah.
It's not. It should be, right? But it's not always. And there's so many more like political and like weird things that go on behind the scenes. And so like that's where I've really struggled, not struggled, but appreciated. Well, maybe struggled is the right word, but I'm glad I struggled with it, right? Like, like it gave me I had a different perspective on it. And so like I just always try and bring it back. Like, I was in a meeting the other day and someone said, well, this department just needs to decide what they want the future to look like for people with disabilities. And I was like, I said, I think people with disabilities need to decide what they want their future to look like, to like call that out and just say like, hey, I think that we need to change our phrasing. And he's like, well, I didn't mean that. And I know this guy. I know he didn't.
Sure. He wasn't trying to be offensive. Yeah.
But I was like, but still, like, this is our big thing right now. And so, I don't know how I got on this either. But I think, like, I'm always trying to say, like, where can we work together, because, like, where can we do advocacy? Where can we just, like, say, like, this is our common ground. This is a major thing. And just kind of get that all together, because like I know people who like, oh, DRO, and I'm like, no. Disability Rights Ohio, good agency, and so there's always.
So I see that like some of the people that are organizing for disability justice are seen as antagonists to the folks that are doing direct care work.
Right, yes.
Like,
I'm sorry, I didn't explain that way.
Because what's the idea from the folks with direct care work? Like they're asking for things that are like too expensive or unreasonable, or they're just a pain in the ass, or like what's the...
I think that there's a lot of... First off, I always try and assume good intent, right? So I think like a lot of people get into the field and they get stuck in certain ways of doing or being, and we form agencies around that. So we form business models around that. We form just different things around that. And then as we learn new things, there's a difficult time incorporating those better practices in because you've been doing it this way for so long. So sometimes there's a challenge. There's like a mindset shift. Even with parents, like I have some parents who are like, no, my child needs to stay in this sheltered, segregated building because this is where they're safe. This is where they belong. And I would challenge and say like, no, your child belongs in the world because they have something to offer the world. And, how can we address your fears and how can we give everyone safety, but also give everyone inclusion, and
opportunity.
So like, an opportunity for that and stuff like that. So I think that people really get frustrated because I think they're trying what they believe is their best. And it's a really hard shift because it is a hard field. And just with, and there's a lot of advocacy right now for like reimbursement rates. And then there's a lot of like, well, if we raise these rates, because Ohio actually is, I want to say one of the third highest states. Like, so we do put a lot of money, for disability care through DODD, which not everyone with a disability is on a DODD waiver. Some are on straight Medicaid waivers. So there's a huge disparity in that reimbursement. So like that's always a big issue. But like we do put a lot of money in it, but it's still not enough. And so like nationwide, it's just, sorry.
Yeah.
But it's, so I think like for me, I feel like people get very defensive when someone comes in and says from a disability rights or disability justice perspective, this could be off. And I don't think they're saying it in a mean way, but I think like people have a view like, but I'm doing a good work, and so when anyone comes in and maybe they feel threatened by that, they get very defensive, where I just feel like we all just need to be like, to be more open to hearing the voices that matter. And I think that sometimes we lose sight of that. Like we're so busy trying to quote unquote support people with disabilities, that we don't listen to people with disabilities. And so I feel like there's a disconnect there.
Well, we need to put in place like systems of listening.
Yes.
Right. So like whether that's like regular community meetings or feedback circles or like opportunities for a direct care provider to sit down with a supervisor and a client and talk about what's going well. Talk about what, so like you have an evaluation, like with your job, right? But you include the person who's most affected by that evaluation.
Right.
But we don't have those necessarily worked into the system. And that's because the system doesn't have enough people, right? I mean, it's like that's asking a lot for a system where people are overworked as it is, right? So building in these steps can feel really arduous, I think, for folks. And it's interesting because we will, like Ohio, compared to 47 other states, is doing all right in terms of what we pay.
Yeah.
But we can't make comparison the bar.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Because if it's still not fair wages, it's not fair wages. It
Right.
doesn't matter if everybody else is also giving crappy wages.
Yeah.
But that does become the thing of how you run state institutions. And I mean institutions like educational institutions and healthcare institutions, all of the institutions is like the bar is always comparison.
Yeah.
So, and that's a really hard cycle to get out of. And I'm not a policy expert by any means, but I think some state usually has to make the big jump, right? To say, we're going to do this thing that seems totally radical, right? And usually that state is like Massachusetts or California or something, right? It's usually not the Midwest, which is unfortunate, actually, because I think the Midwest could do some really interesting things here in the Rust Belt. We have we have a long history of unions here in the Rust Belt. Like we should pull on that history to like get fair wages and support for direct care providers. But so that's one of the problems that you deal with on a regular basis is trying to figure out how to pay people fair wages, how to get people to stay, I imagine.
How to just get people right now.
And how to get anyone at all. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is, also the case with, I'm sure childcare right now, same thing, right? Early childhood education, like they also can't find people right now. What are the other challenges that you see? I mean, those seem like big ones, but what are the other? So when someone asks you, you need to decide the future of your organization, and you're like, no, we need to like have a community conversation about this. But like, what are some of the things that you think about? Long-term, short-term?
I think for me, the things that I think about the most, again, are things that I don't like. Like I don't. I mean, I can do the operational aspect, but like me, like I'm a boots to the ground. I'm like, yes, let's do this, let's do that, let's And so, but like again, I have Ellie's voice in my head. Sarah, what are the steps you need to get there? Which isn't a bad. I mean, like it's a good thing. Like I really owe you for that because like literally, I see the face you made all the time.
Oh,
no. I need it. What are the steps?
My mom always said I don't have a poker face. So,
no, me neither. Me neither.
It's all right there. Yeah.
I actually was like watching a podcast, like one of the ones we recorded, because I like to like skim through and make sure I didn't say anything too terrible. And I'm like, why do I make all those faces?
You can't help it. It's not.
What's going on?
It's fine.
No, I think a lot about. So the first thing I always think about is, are we supporting people in a way that is, that it promotes dignity and choice and is what the support that they need, right? Like, are we supporting people the way that we should be? The answer to that right now is no, because I don't have enough staff. The staff I do have are working 80 plus hours a week, like just outrageous hours, and not getting paid enough to do it. So very aware of that. I'm always looking at ways that we can increase, like, I cut overhead a significant amount, like administration costs. I try and keep those down. So I'm always thinking about that. Like, how are we supporting people? Honestly, right now, it's like everyone's alive. Like, everyone's alive and they have someone there, which sucks. Like, that's the worst feeling in the world because it's not anything like what I, and I think we do a good job. I'm not saying anything like my staff are amazing. These people work their asses off, but they shouldn't have to. So like that's frustrating. I worry a lot about how many hours people are working, like their home work life. Is that, you know, how's that going? Are we asking too much? Are we, you know, insurance honestly is the biggest terror in my life because our insurance costs have gone up so much.
Insurance for employees?
Yes, employee insurance have just skyrocketed. That this past year, as a company, I said, we're eating the cost of this increase. I am not, because it was worse insurance for more money.
Oh my gosh.
And so like shopping insurance, like that kind of stuff, I stress about all the time. And it seems like but health insurance is important.
It's really
like
important.
And we don't even offer like super great insurance, you know? So it's like, I'm always trying to think like about stuff like that. Like what are these things that we can offer? Like there are no, I don't think any type of therapy or mental health benefits in our plan. So then we do offer an employee assistance program or where they can call in and you get 5 free. So you get some sort, like if you're having a mental health challenge, yes, there's these, they're free, but it's not long term. So if you need something long term, then my insurance isn't covering it. So that's kind of the stuff I really focus on a lot. And then just how are we interacting with people? Like, are we, you know, I mean, and that's when I say, how are we supporting people? I remember being young, thinking I knew it all. And there was this person who I was supporting and like, I would just get on her all that, well, you're making bad choices. You're doing this. You need to do this because it's the better way. Well, you know, and like just treating this person like a child and she was a grown ass adult. And so I'm very cognizant of that now, right? Growing a little, taking some courses, learning more, living your life. And so I think, I don't know, in community, like how do we develop community? Like, so a lot of everything I do is like, how do we develop community? Where are those supports that, hey, I don't have a DSP for you, but you have this great community of people at your religious organization or in your apartment complex because, you know, you are friendly and stuff like that, and maybe a neighbor can come in. So, like, where can we offer community supports and where can we develop that and give people, like, true belonging? Because when I think about it, like, for E, she is always going to need support. Every moment of her life, she is going to need some sort of support or a person there with her.
Sure. But she's got a lot of siblings, so that'll help. No, I'm just kidding.
Yes. And cousins.
And cousins. But, but no, I mean, right, these should be paid.
Yeah.
There should be paid support. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's fine if, like, people want to, like, I'll help out for an hour here or there. But at the end of the day, this system was created by families, by people with disabilities. This system was created to offer that support.
Yeah.
And we promised to do that for so long. And now we're saying, well, can't. You know, like, so that's a huge thing. But so she'll always need someone there. But I don't want that to mean that she doesn't have true, wonderful friendships. Like, I want people to love her and appreciate her and not just be paid to be there. So, like, there will always be that element, but
she should have people in her life that are there and not getting paid.
Yeah.
They're there and they don't have to worry about the direct care things. They can just enjoy her company.
Yes.
And that should be important. And I think sometimes family members miss out on that because they're also doubling in as care providers, right? I mean, I think Sarah Smith Rainey, who teaches down at Bowling Green, has done a bunch of work on disability and relationships. And, you know, one of the things that came out of her work was this idea that, like, you need to have partners cannot be direct care providers, right? Because it takes away the pleasure. I mean, there is pleasure in direct care. That's one of the things that she did find, right? Is that, like, partners who provide direct care for their partners, like, there is pleasure there. But also you need a break from the direct care in order to have other kinds of pleasure, right? And if you don't have that, you're missing something, right? So I heard two things as you were talking about the future of disability and direct care that would super help. So the first thing sounds like if you didn't have to spend all your time shopping health insurance, and if health insurance wasn't such a corrupt industry in the first place, you could have time freed up for other things and your workers could be better taken care of. So to me, that sounds like we need single payer healthcare, right? We just everybody needs to be able to access a centralized healthcare system. And we can create a system where people have a base of being taken care of, and like in a few other countries, right, they can add on to that with their own money if they want, so that when they go to the hospital, they can get the single suite. Fine. If that's important to you, fine, right? But everyone needs access to the same care. That's a basic human right. So that would help your job.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I'm thinking is, like, if your workers could unionize or did unionize, they would have a support of a union entity behind them so that you are not in a place of feeling bad about making a decision because their union is going to push your entity, right? And you're just kind of like, you're at the table to help negotiate, but you're not like there are systems and structures in place to help that negotiation. It's not just you being like, I wish I could. I wish I could, right? Like, unions are really important to help protect workers' rights and to help them come together to say, hey, we are going to ask, this new contract, we're going to ask for a 2% raise, and we're going to ask for, it's probably not really like flexible work hours or whatever, right? Yeah. Like something like that, or an extra week of vacation or something, like, these things that are like reasonable when asked for by, a group of 25 people, that are part of a national union, right?
So I won't lie. Yeah. Because philosophically and in theory, I do very strongly agree in unions. Yeah. But in my current position, the thought terrifies me because I can't think through it rationally.
Sure. What's terrifying about it?
I guess my fear is, because I do, and I struggle with this all the time because, there have been talks in the past and stuff like that, and I'm just like, whatever happens. Sure. I'm not, but I think that there is like a certain amount of anxiety when I think through it, just for the fact that I feel that so much of what we do is not like, and it could be in some places, but like, we're not a capitalistic industry. So we are I can't raise my rates. Like, I can't go in and say, oh, from now on, we got to put this price on so I can pay these people extra.
Sure.
I have to go in, I have to look at my organizational structure. I have to look at, are we doing too many conferences and trainings? Like, are we doing this? Are we doing that? Do we really need this membership? Yeah. So like, I have to like look in and see like where I can skim off the top until there's
not a lot
shift.
of top. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so but also like, I understand absolutely, like, there needs to be some organization, there needs to be people who are advocating on behalf. So I struggle with this industry in that, and not that and like I said, like, and I feel, just being honest, like, I'm totally like, if auto industry, you need to be unionized. Starbucks, you need to be unionized.
Yeah, because they're making big profits.
Right. And so, but for like agencies who aren't, I do struggle with that concept. And like I said, not that I'm against it, but like when I think about it personally, like, would I feel attacked if like we decided to union, like, and so like probably to take like the personal out of it, because there is part of me that's like, I try so hard to do this, this, and this, that it's, but then I'm like, well, maybe like if someone else then came in though and said like, okay, you think you've done all this, but what can we do if we do this? And so like that could be good too. But, I always, like, specifically in the industry that is just, like, always, we're not making huge profits. We're not, at least I'm not,
You're not taking home six figures, Sarah? I don't know.
Maybe that's a me issue. I don't know. Yeah. But, when that is just so... Yeah, but then you would also add that union and that voice to the advocacy at the state level, because we are going and we are asking for things. And like you said, like, it's usually like East, West Coast that are doing all these like big push. Why not Ohio?
Why not? Yeah, because, well, anyway. And the thing is, you can't, in some ways, like, you can't have one without the other, right? Which is what makes the change tricky, because you're going to have to change multiple things at the same time. So you can't, one of the reasons why it feels like it is true. And I don't want to say it feels like, because it's true. It is true that you can't pay your workers what you want to pay them, is because there's this huge cost of health insurance that you have to provide them, right? If that got taken off the table because that was provided by a different entity, now you're working with a different set of funds, right? And then you have a union come in, and the union is full of, has experts working for them that are in conversation with other members of the union in other parts of the state, other parts of the country, right? Who can say, okay, well, these are the laws here. This is like what we can do. This is what's viable. This is what, and so the negotiation can happen. And it's not just like you feeling like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I know enough. I don't know if I have that. I don't know. I haven't, I have to run this day-to-day organization. I haven't gone and looked at all 50 states to figure out like what my bar is to do X, Y, and Z, right? Because you can't do both of those things, right? Like it's not possible. You only have so many hours in the day. So you have, it's like you have a team of people that are all working to make sure everyone is taken care of, right? But, and there are probably other things too, besides those two things that would have to happen.
No, but you saying that, I don't mean to interrupt you. Like I'm thinking right now about what I pay every 2 weeks into a family health insurance plan. And if I had that money it's outrageous. Yeah. It's outrageous what we pay. And so like my goal for next year is I'm going to have to, I have
You're going to kick some kids off the insurance.
I kicked my own kid off my health insurance. E. She's a pricey lady.
Yeah, E's a little pricey.
The best, only the best for that one.
Only the best.
But because she had the backup of Medicaid through the DD waiver, she was making my costs go up too much.
Yeah, and that's ridiculous. I mean, that's absurd.
I can't even insure my own child. Yeah. And here I'm like trying to ask other people.
That's for real, right?
To use my insurance.
I know. Well, we were just doing, so I said I'm a new parent. So we're adopting from the foster system, and our kid's been living with us for almost a year, 3 days until our anniversary. And, we were just going through the negotiation with the state about if he'll get a subsidy, and because he's an older adoptee, and if he can stay on Medicaid, right? And we were like, is there any reason that we would want him to not be on Medicaid? Because everything is taken care of right now. And the woman who does the negotiations like full time, she's like, no, this is better than what you have. I guarantee it. And I was like, yeah, I can only assume, because he's getting everything that he needs right now. And if I put him on my insurance, like he's not going to get some of the trauma therapy that he's getting and some of the rehab that he's getting. Like he's got disabilities that need to be addressed. And, so I was like, no, I would. And you know what? Keep him on Medicaid. And if you can get me on Medicaid,
I would love it.
I would also love it.
I need to go to the dentist, the eye doctor. So, like my other kids are like 5 years overdue for like a dental exam, because I'm like, my insurance doesn't cover the dental.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I mean, that's real, right?
Yeah.
So, So I mean, things have to change, and it's not up to you as an individual person, and that's what's so frustrating, I think, to people, and that's why people burn out, is because they see themselves. Once they're in the field, they see themselves and they see what they can change, right? And they can make, having a good boss makes a huge difference in someone's life. Working for someone who's, can I say, it's a podcast. Yeah. Working for someone who's really sucks, right? Even if the system is okay, if you're dealing with someone every day, day in and day out, who like just does not click with you, that's really hard. So having a good boss is very, very important. So I'm not saying that you're not super important, but right at the end of the day, you're like, your hands are tied in different ways. Like the same thing happened at my kid's daycare or my kid's Head Start. Like the person who was running the Head Start is like, she's like, I got a grant to pay an extra $1 an hour to all my workers to show them how much I want to keep them. But like, that's all I can do. You know what I mean? Like that, like my hands are tied. And I'm like, but she's probably a really great boss, So yeah, it's like you have to see yourself in the system and then figure out how to get a team around you that can help push the system while you're also doing the hard work in the middle, right?
Yeah, and I'm a part of a couple different work groups and, reach out to legislators or, have them come into our, we do, like, let's go have lunch, all that stuff. So I do
On you? None. Not on me. I can't afford the lunch, but you.
Lunch, please.
Yeah.
This is really just how I get fed these days now.
I'm going to invite you to lunch and please pay my bill. Thank you so much.
Okay. But yeah, and so it is really interesting to see like the things, just the process of how things take time and the timetable. And it's so hard.
Yeah.
Like, this is the thing I struggle with, is that just freaking do, but it's not like there's this whole process. There's budget cycles. There's, they're in their home districts these weeks, so maybe meet with them there. Maybe meet them with them in Columbus. Or, there's all these different things.
Yeah, with like legislators,
takes time. And I literally, this is what I struggle with, is like, who's dying? Well, I mean, I quote this all the time in Being Human, Judith Human. She didn't say this, but someone else said, you guys are all in there politicizing and we're out here dying. And I think about that quote all the time, because I'm just like, this is terrible. People are giving notice to people who need 24-hour supports to survive because they don't have the staff.
Yeah. What's going to happen?
What's going to happen? How many people, like, what does the body count need to get to in order? And then I don't have a lot of faith in that. Like, if you look at, who's acceptable, who are the acceptable bodies to sacrifice in the name of, in the name of our politics and all that stuff.
And what will happen is that we'll call it a tragedy. It's just a tragedy. It couldn't have been helped, right? And the reality is it probably could have been helped. It probably could have been helped a long time ago, and now it's a lot more difficult to help, right, and to address it because we didn't do X, Y, and Z previously, and now we're in this crisis state. And so now we have, it's the thing. I think whenever I think about a 50-year timeline from, so in what year is this? 2022, right? Yeah. So 2072, right? Maybe I'll be alive. Maybe I won't. Who knows? But, you're like, okay, in 50 years, we can't be living and doing things the way we are right now.
Right.
Like, we just cannot. It cannot be the case. Like, environmentally, sustainability-wise, in terms of, like, care for people. It's just, so we have to change things. And the question is, how can we do that and start those steps in radical ways where people still feel safe? Because the people right now that have positions of power feel the reason why they react against change is because they feel unsafe, right? And so we have to create a world where they can feel safe and not be afraid of the fact that they're going to lose. They're going to lose some stuff, right? You're going to have to lose some stuff if you're a wealthy person. You're going to have to change some things that might make you uncomfortable. And so you have to compare your discomfort with someone else's life, right? And that's the reality. But we can't keep doing what we're doing. So we just have to say, suck it up.
Suck it.
No, I'm just kidding.
Life's not fair.
Life's not fair.
Let my 5-year-old tell you about it. It's not fair. Do you know what my kid said the other day? This about life not being, like, my child was crying. 2 of them were crying because we don't have in our house the ability to stand on our roof. Like, we don't have a door that goes out to a roof where we could stand or make a porch or put a chair on. We don't have that in our house.
That's really hard.
And it's really unfair.
What did they want to do on the roof?
I have no idea. I said, what every other person we know has a spot and they can stand on their roof. I said, that is false. That is false. That is false. That is false.
Yeah. But also, I mean, my question would be like, well, what's the objective on the roof?
What is the
thing? Is it throwing something? Could you throw something from a different spot? Maybe climb a tree and throw something.
They threw multiple toys out of a second-story window, and I was just happy that it wasn't like a sibling.
Yeah.
There was
that
toys.
Sounds great. It sounds like they achieved what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
So there are different ways to do these things that you don't just need.
They are problem solvers.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, we don't have a place to stand on the roof, but we could open the window
and throw things out there.
Yeah.
And that's fine.
I maybe had just like a small heart attack because I'm like, there's a baby in the house. Do not throw the baby out the window.
Don't throw the baby. Yeah, just not the baby, guys. Just not the baby. Toys. Or the dog.
Yeah.
Not the dog.
No, not Daphne.
Not Daphne.
Not Daphne Milliman.
Yeah. It's hard. It's hard.
So,
speaking of babies, do you want to hear about how much time do we have?
as much time as you want.
Oh, okay, great. So do you want to hear about the project I've been working on recently here in Toledo?
Yes.
So I am working on a new book project that I'm calling Gestational Ableism, but I'm looking at the intersection of disability and pregnancy, right? So there's two things that I've been doing this summer that are really on my mind. And the first is sort of I'm doing research with people with uteruses all over the country who have been pregnant in the last 5 to 10 years, so recent pregnancies, who are disabled, right? To talk about their experiences with prenatal care, labor and delivery, postnatal care, which I'm sort of identifying as like the fourth trimester of care, right?
Yeah.
Like where do you stop that, right? But and I'm learning, I've done 10 interviews so far. My goal is 30 qualitative interviews to sort of, because we don't have any national data about their experiences of disabled people during labor and delivery and birth, right?
Okay.
We haven't been keeping national data about that.
Good.
So we talk a lot right now about the huge disparities between Black maternal health and white maternal health, and Black people with uteruses being 4 times more likely to die of childbirth-related causes, right? And that's absolutely true. And we need to address that. But what we're not looking at is how much that intersects with disability. And we know that we have higher rates of disability within the poor population, within the population of people of color, right? These marginalized groups, because it's a cycle, right? You live in poverty, you get exposed to more things that cause disability. You get disability, you live in poverty because you're not, you don't have the money, right? And it just creates a cycle of poverty. So, so I'm learning a ton of really amazing things from those people that I've been talking to, including the ways in which prenatal care or labor and delivery care is not accessible and is damaging to their processes of labor and delivery, and then also the kinds of fears that many of these people in the labor, many of the people I've talked to are trying to avoid hospitals because there's the fear that their kid is going to get taken from them as soon as it's born, because it's you're considered not an able parent, right? And by social services, and everyone I've talked to has their kids, so that has not happened, right? But there's this lingering fear, and there has been at least 3 of the 9 people that I talked to so far had social services come down. Right? And they had complete, these were planned pregnancies. These were like total support systems in place, et cetera, but they happened to be upper middle class. They could get nannies. They could, there were things in place that made it so that they were able to do this. So anyway, that's one project I'm working on. Super exciting. And then the other project I'm working on is more local here in town. So I'm working with the Neighborhood Health Association, which has 8 or 9 clinics around town, 2 of which do prenatal care. And we are providing a doula to anyone that's enrolled with them who wants that, right?
That's awesome.
So I'm one of 2 doulas that is provided. It sounds weird, like I'm provided. But the goal is, they started with a grant that was meant to address the disparities between Black and white women's maternal health. And Ohio has terrible rates, and Lucas County has the worst in Ohio, right? So we need to address this, right? So they had a grant. We were supposed to start in January of 2020. And then as grants go, we are a couple months behind getting things rolled out. And then we were about to start like middle of March, right after spring break of 2020. Yeah. And then COVID shutdown happened. So the grant kind of changed, and the project changed and evolved over the course of the last 2 years. Now we're off the grant, so and they're going to be funding us. And the goal is to be able to advocate for, assist people who are in labor and delivery, or having prenatal care or postnatal care with their gestational experience, right? And I think that's really important right now, because I think that's one of the things that we see is that we know that Black women are treated worse in labor and delivery than white women. We know that to be the fact. And we know that disabled people are assumed to need a certain kind of birth, a C-section, an emergency C-section, an early C-section, which causes different outcomes. And so if we have prenatal education, if we have advocacy, if I can use my white privilege on the floor to push for equity, right? If I'm serving a client who is a person of color, right? Or a non-native English speaker, or, whoever that may be. So I'm really excited because as we roll out, I think we're going to see really different outcomes. But it's going to take time because people aren't just going to like trust me and be like, oh yeah, sure, come to this very intimate moment with me. And like, I would love you to like know, like that's not going to, like, it's going to take time. It's going to take word of mouth and building trust in the community. But the fact that NHA is out there funding this,
that's awesome,
means that they see a need and they see the efficacy in what we're doing. So it's super exciting. And I'm excited to talk about the project because I think people can really benefit from it. NHA tends to serve people, low-income Medicaid people, but it's certainly a program that we hope that could be duplicated in many other settings, right? And right now, and this is another thing that's kind of up actually in Ohio, but because we're now forcing people to carry their pregnancies, because we've eliminated access to abortion here in Ohio after 6 weeks. One of the counters to that is there's a bill going through right now about legalizing and providing doulas, doula coverage on Medicaid, right? So that it would be paid for. Yeah. Which, of course, as a doula, I'm like, oh, that's amazing. That's great. That would be so great if everyone could get access to that. That would be standard of care.
Like, it should just
be. And then, most, like, I feel like we say this all the time and it's like unsubstantiated, but, in most European countries, right, midwives provide care. OBs are there only in emergency situations. So it's midwives and doulas that are doing the care in a hospital often or a birth center, right? It's not like people are birthing at home very often. That's not common. But we don't do that in the United States, right? And we have various levels of legality for midwifery in different states, and we don't have any centralized system of certification and all these kinds of things. It's really tricky. The doula legislation here in Ohio is tricky because what it's going to require is oversight into certification, right? And so what that means is you have to have a certification from an agency that they deem appropriate, right? Okay. Now, I have like 4 different certifications, so surely one of those will be deemed appropriate. But, a lot of doulas are like, but this shouldn't be, legislated and oversight provided by what? Who are the legislators in the House? The white cis dudes that are like in the House, they're going to know what appropriate doula certification looks like what, who's going to create. So that's one of the issues is like you create a system that pays for a doula, but then you legislate and regulate the doula. Right. And I feel very much like I don't think regulation is a bad thing. But I do question, like, well, how are you going to create the team that's going to provide that oversight? Right. Who's going to be on it? It's the same way, like, I feel about legalizing marijuana. It's like, just legalize it so we can regulate it, dude, and, like, get the taxes on it. Like, it's fine. Like, if we regulate it, then we won't have so many, like, stupid shit in it that people are smoking already. Yeah. And then it'll be safer. Yeah. And then, we can get the taxes and, like, support our schools. Yeah. Like, what are we thinking, Ohio? Everyone's just going to Michigan right now. Right. So anyway, but it's like a similar kind of thing. Like, it's just like, if more people can have access to it, particularly poor people, I think that's where we're going to see some really big differences. And I do think when we talk about birth justice, what we're talking about is a piece of disability justice. Because when we're talking about people living in poverty and providing safe places where they can provide labor and delivery, they can have their labors and delivery, and their kids can be taken care of. Like, we're talking about often disabled people, right? Not solely, right? But it's part of the apparatus of ableism, where we're like, oh, well, if those babies don't make it, if those mamas don't make it, it's probably just because, it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy. That's what poverty does. It's a tragedy.
Such a tragedy. Unpreventable.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an unpreventable tragedy.
You can't stop certain things.
Can't stop capitalism. So anyway, I'm really excited about this project. So I'm amazing. Like completely immersed in sort of this work around disability and pregnancy. The other thing I've been doing is like all this stuff around how infertility fits into disability. Is it a disability in and of itself? The World Health Organization thinks it's the second largest disability in the world.
Oh.
Right, because if you think of the definition of disability, it's like an inability to do a major life activity. And gestating is considered a major life activity, right? So is infertility in and of itself a disability? How does it fit into disability law? And then how do people who experience infertility see it as a form of identity? Do they see themselves as fitting into a disability community? So I've been doing all this work around that as well, because I think that's also part of the picture.
Yeah.
And then I could go on and on, but there's all these folks that think infertility is actually something that's really only emerged since the 1970s, because before that we called people like barren. Oh, they're barren.
Right.
Because there's nothing you can do about it, really.
Yes.
Right? But once we get IVF, we get other prenatal technologies, what happens is then certain bodies with uteruses, usually cisgendered white upper middle class people, are encouraged to pursue reproductive technologies as much as they can in order to reproduce the race, right? Yeah. So infertility becomes a medically diagnosable through the pursuit of these technologies.
Okay.
So
of course it's going to be greater.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have even though infertility disproportionately affects people in the global south as an effect of war and trauma and poverty and lack of nutrition, the representation that we see of infertility is wealthy white women, right? So true. And legislation that we create around it is around wealthy white people, right? So looking at that distinction, and meanwhile, Black women can't even be assured that they'll have a safe labor and delivery. Yeah. So looking at all of those distinctions is a part of this project. Yeah. So it's all just like swirling around.
I was going to say, there's so many rabbit holes. It did remind me real quick. So when I worked at the county board, there was a woman with a disability, pregnant, had the baby, but I found out later that in-laws of hers, I don't know if it's like a brother-in-law, sister-in-law, or something like that, actually, while she was pregnant, went out and made a whole nursery at their house, thinking that as soon as she had this baby, they would take it.
Oh, I thought they meant that they made a nursery for her. I was like, that's so sweet. Oh, they made a nursery in their own home. That's fucked up. In their home. Didn't say anything to this person about it.
And she is, she is married. She has, her son is with her, all that stuff. So that worked out. But them thinking, Children's Services would never allow her to keep a baby. Right. They went and decked out their, thinking that, we're going to take this baby. So that was just horrifying. So I feel like that, it happens so often for disabled mothers. And then even though, and I would not equate, myself to a oppressed minority in anything, but when you were talking about birthing, when I was on Medicaid, there was a huge difference. Same amount of education, same person, but when I was on a Medicaid, there was a huge difference, and a forced C-section, basically. And by that time, I was like, I'm just get this baby out. I don't care how it comes out, Yeah. But I had wanted to birth or vaginally, whatever, stuff like that. Naturally, I like the drugs personally, but to each their own. But yeah, opposed to when I had my own private insurance and. Yeah.
One of the women I talked to, and these are women all over the country, so it varies by state, obviously, but one of the women I talked to said she had a problem. The people who are trying to check her out with her baby, out of the hospital, right, to give her, what are the papers called when you get
discharged?
Thank you. Your discharge papers. It took an extra 24 hours because they couldn't figure out the billing. She was on SSI. And they couldn't figure, they were like, this has never happened before. We've never had someone on SSI deliver. And so we don't know how to do the billing, and we don't know how to, it was a system. She was like, well, you figure it out, because I'm just, that's a you problem, not a me problem.
Not a me problem, this is a you problem.
But that was just one of those systemic things that you're like, of course, because you assume if you're a disabled person that, one, either you're too old to gestate a child, or two, you're too disabled to gestate a child, right? It's not possible, or you're not having sex. How could you be pregnant?
Disabled people don't have sex.
And there's also a few other people I talked to who, in order to become pregnant, did pursue IVF, right? And they as part of that pursuit, there was all sorts of different kinds of judgments around their ability to parent or become pregnant or keep a pregnancy that are, you can assume what some of those things were. And so like trying to choose care around that. And none of these people are in a queer relationship, I should say. Like all of these people so far that I'm referencing from my research are cisgendered people with uteruses. So they appear and act as women, and they have partners that appear and act as men. Okay. Right? So if you had added a queerness factor on top of that, there are people in my study who identify as queer, but they are in relationships that appear
very
straight, right? Or heteronormative. So
my fancy words.
Your fancy words. So, like it's probably not a surprise that I'm not finding right now those people, because it's probably a lot more difficult because of all of the judgments. And also IVF isn't covered for queer people, right? It's covered for, well, it depends on what state you're in, right? Yeah. But for heterosexual people, right? So anyway, it's really interesting stuff. And I think when we think about the future of disability justice, it's going to have to include some of this research about who gets to be born and why, and who gets to do the birthing and why, and who's exploited in the process. And, these unregulated prenatal technology companies, right? They're not regulated. So we don't have, we need to do some work there, right, in terms of thinking about that. So it's very exciting stuff.
It's so interesting. No, I love hearing about like the stuff that everyone's doing, because I'm like, oh, this is so fascinating. I was just telling Paul earlier, I'm like, there is this project that Dr. Gilbert and Dr. Nielsen were working on back when I first had Cadence, and I think about it all the time. Like all the time. I still think about it because I was doing some transcription work because I just had her. I wasn't really working. And I was doing transcription work for it. And like, I actually called her, I think like a year and a half ago. And I'm like, what happened to that? Because I think about this weekly.
This is part of my life.
I need to know. I need some resolution.
And so what happened? What happened to it?
It was a documentary they were working on, and I don't think it was ever finished, but she's like, this may get me to finish. I'm like, please do. And please share information with me. Or tell me where to look. Can you point me in the general direction of this information? Because at least once a week. For the last 7 years.
Documentaries are so expensive to make. That's the problem. Well, I'm working on one right now, and it's like we keep running out of money. But the thing is, like, because you want to do the creative part of the project and all of the stuff on the ground, but you have to have all this. At the same time that you're doing that, you have to apply for grants that are hundreds of thousands of dollars to come to the table so you can do the post-production and all that stuff. So it's like, it's absurd.
It is crazy. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm so happy you came. I appreciate it. It's always good seeing you.
You as well.
All right. And then we'll just be like, cut.
Is this our sign-off?
I don't know. We can, you have,
signing
what else
off.
do you have?
Signing off from Toledo, Ohio. This was Allie Day.